This conversation with Rick Archer, architect, storyteller, and visionary co-founder of Overland Partners, is nothing short of extraordinary. Rick takes us on a journey through his career, sharing how he blends architecture with human transformation, tackles issues like homelessness, and embraces challenges most would deem impossible for a newcomer. From his early artistic passions nurtured at Houston's Museum of Fine Art to pivotal moments that redefined his purpose, this episode is a masterclass in resilience, creativity, meaningful work, and leadership. Whether you're an architect, dreamer, or someone seeking inspiration, Rick's story is sure to leave a lasting impact. It certainly did for us.
Well, welcome. Welcome to Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life. Season 3, Episode
2.
Duels. And we have, so now it's like special to the third season guest
Each
today.
guest more special than the last.
You say that to all of them. I know. You have to.
But there's an exponent to it, right? So we'll do that. So why don't we just get started with our intros, and ladies first.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Payton. I'm a comedian, actor, and podcast personality.
Well, you'll have me beat on the humor for sure.
Well, we'll see about that.
And hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Leon Vanstone, rocket scientist, storyteller, idiot, co-founder and founding up co-host of Uncharted, among many other things.
You've said that once or twice.
Several times on this show, in fact.
Actually, three seasons worth.
26 times.
And I
Love hanging out with rocket scientists. Yep.
yeah.
Do that frequently.
Yeah.
Me too.
And I'm Dan Dillard, also co-founder of Founding Up and co-host of Uncharted, among other things. And we won't get into all those details. They come out in the show. And today we've got a great guest and friend in the audience. We met on another show maybe 3 months ago, something of that
I think
nature.
longer than that, but it feels like it was recent.
And I just loved your story. And I said, let's get you on Uncharted, just because I want to be able to tell your story and broadcast it as much as possible. Because I just think it's cool to see how life is never planned. It just kind of like unfolds, and it unfolds in sometimes shocking and surprising ways.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, let's go with it.
Whatever, let's do it.
Yeah. And so I'm so happy to have you back on. And
Thank you, Dan.
And really want to now have more audience, and you guys get to ask some good questions as far as history goes. Let's start. Let's go there. Let's go. And I just kind of started easy. Let's just start with when you were 15. What did you want to become?
Well, tell us who you are first.
Yeah.
So that
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you skipped the whole
the
intro.
intro would be
I just-
great.
Everyone knows
I'm
who I am.
yeah.
Like, no one knows
So
who I am.
excited to be like, let's get into the story.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie.
Yes.
I'm Rick Archer. I'm one of the founders at Overland Partners Architects. Started the firm about 37 years ago, going on 38 years ago.
Wow.
And we practice architecture all over the world with the goal of creating physical transformations that lead to human ones. We want to change people's lives.
That's
It's never
cool.
just a building.
Okay, now we go into the.
Now,
Thank
What
you.
did you want to be
Yes,
when you were
thank you.
15?
when I was 15, I already knew I wanted to be an architect.
Wow.
Oh, number two.
Were you into
Remember?
Lego?
I predated Lego. I
Really?
mean, people in this generation literally ask me all the time, how did you ever become an architect without Lego?
Right.
But there were Lincoln Logs
There you go.
No,
and
that's-
Duplo, perhaps?
no Duplo. but there were cardboard boxes
Mm,
and there were anything I could find
Pillow
to make anything
forts.
out of.
yeah.
You know, it was just literally
required more imagination than would.
Mhm.
about making. And I grew up as a young artist. By the time I was 12, 13, I had completed every class offered at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. I had enough hours to have a degree in fine art. And I really thought I wanted to be a painter. But,
And that was at what age? Because you said.
oh gosh, you know.
So
my
your
parents
earliest
were-
memory was painting.
Yeah, my parents just recognized that I had a gift,
Mhm.
and so they enrolled me, and I spent many afternoons at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts just wandering around. It was kind of my haunt,
Mm.
and fell in love with that place. It was a Mies design building, if you know who Mies is, very famous modernist. And the school was in the basement, but I really had the run of it and loved that experience. But, as a kid growing up.
And how old were you there at that point? Like just roughly?
Yeah, I probably started eight-ish when I started taking classes, and I don't remember exactly, but I remember that we moved from Houston when I was 13, and so I sort of had a shift of trajectory at that point, moved to Washington, D.C. But, I was one of 5 kids. My older brother wanted to become a physician, which he is, and when we were in family settings, people would always say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I mean, it's kind of the classic, unfortunate question we ask children.
Yeah. Right.
And I would say, "I want to be an artist." And typically the response to that was, "Well, he hasn't quite figured out what he's going to do yet."
He still wants to make money.
That's not the answer I
though.
wanted him to give. I'm going to give him a few more years.
But your brother had it right. I'm going to be a doctor.
I'm going to be a doctor. My dad is an attorney. So, those were very respectable. And not that they devalued art, but I don't think they saw that as a career aspiration. And
before you go on, the reason you said number 2 earlier is that we've had only one other guest that knew what they wanted to be at 7. So it was like, and she wanted to be in politics, and she's
at 7.
At 7,
and she
ran for class president. That was the.
But everyone else that we've had here is like.
But
I did a thing, I did another thing, and
we've had so many people say they want to be an architect, and then you pointed out that they're technically still building things if they're entrepreneurs.
Yeah, a lot of
but I wasn't good at math. Is usually what they say.
Right. That is.
I couldn't draw. But
that's what the slide rule was for, wasn't it?
Yeah, who knows? That's what engineers are for, I think. But my dad was in politics, and so I think part of that for me was saying I don't want to be a politician. Right. I saw the demands that put on his life, on our family's life, and I loved to paint, draw, create. At the age of 12, I encountered this idea of being an architect. I remember building my own falling water off of the banks of the Roaring Fork River outside of Aspen.
What, like a little fort?
Yeah, just kind of created from sticks and rocks and things that I found. And
because that's a very iconic building.
It is, but I didn't know it at the time. It's just,
how many bedrooms did your one have?
Mine was just sticks and rocks, and maybe some leaves for a roof. But my great aunts, who were really, really dear to me, basically said, "You're like an architect," and I thought, okay, that seems acceptable. And so when I started saying I'd be an architect, that got a better response.
You got a better response?
Yeah. So, I wish I could say that, I was more independent thinking than that. But like most kids, I wanted to please my parents and the adults around me. And I decided to do that. And I think actually looking back, that was a real gift because while I was running away from politics, I realized that I'm very, very interested in the public process and that architecture is a great place to combine art and policy. And so a lot of the work that I do is highly public and engages some of the most complex problems that we face in the world today. And so it's a great way for me to bring both those things together.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm a big fan of ontological design. So I do appreciate there when you're saying that, like if you build a building to have lots of open co-working spaces, people will collaborate. And if you build an office to be full of cubicle hell, then they won't. And I think we live in an age now where if your office happens to be cubicle hell, that's by design. That's not a leftover anymore, right? Like it tells you something about the way someone wanted you to use that space.
Winston Churchill famously said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards they shape us."
Right. You build the tool, and then the tool changes the way you do the work.
Bingo.
Right. And it's linked. It's a network effect, right?
Yeah.
I build a cubicle hell building and then nobody works with each other. So call centers are all cubicle hell because you don't want them talking to each other.
Right.
Whereas Google offices are all open and breezy because they want collaboration. That's how they generate value.
But they also don't let you out of the office. So
no, that's why it's got the gym
and no life on the street.
Right.
Yeah, right. Don't ever
Which
leave.
is beginning to backfire. because people in those office environments are starting to say, gosh, I really would like to mix with the rest of the world.
I want to work from home
Or
because
there's
I don't have an
burnout.
option anymore.
Yeah, well, that too.
Or it ivory towers you and your employees eventually disconnect from the world writ large.
Yeah. And unfortunately, so I think as an architect, I'm really interested in those things. How is a building a tool for living?
Mm-hmm.
How does it actually enhance human flourishing or perhaps diminish it? And a lot of the work that I've been doing really engages at the intersection of those kinds of things, like the unhoused or issues of immigration or abuse, mental health, et cetera.
Reminds me a lot of what Jorge Venegas is kind of
Mhm,
envisioned. You know Dr. Jorge Venegas out of A&M?
I don't.
So he's teaches in the School of Architecture or College of Architecture now. Anyway, I'll make that introduction because he's got this grand vision. It's everything you're talking about. This sustainable communities. How do you make this happen? And what you're saying is just rings so close to kind of the vision of impacting a whole community. So
That's the goal.
yeah. Okay, cool. So you had it figured out at least.
So you're 15.
Close. You were in
North
the
Star.
Mm-hmm.
12, I've got a North Star. I am on a trajectory as fast as I can to become an architect. And that meant I was going to go to a 5-year undergraduate degree. It's the quickest way I could get licensed as an architect. I did. I spent a year at the University of Oregon doing architecture and competing in gymnastics, found out within a year that was an impossibility, just time-wise. Transferred to UT Austin, where I got my degree, and graduated, moved to Washington, D.C. And of course, if you know any architects, it's a grind to get licensed after you've graduated. So you have to work 3 years and you take all these exams. And
it's like getting chartered or something if you're an accountant or whatever, is that right?
Yeah, but the pass rate is extremely low, and it's very, very time-consuming and often very difficult. I figured out, I lived in Virginia, I worked in Washington, D.C., and because of a loophole in the system, I was able to take all of my exams within the first year after graduating and was licensed at the age of 22, 23.
Wow.
Which
all about the loophole, folks.
Determination. I love it.
It's all about the loopholes, folks.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, and that's what mentorship's about. It's like teaching you what those loopholes are so you can.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that you could take half of them in one state without any experience and the other half in the other state without experience and said, I think I
can do the math here.
I'll do it.
Yeah. And so I was able to be licensed, and that got me off to the races really fast. But I realized pretty quickly on that wasn't satisfying.
Right. Doesn't bring the experience. There's a reason for that.
It doesn't. And because I was so driven by success, that was my number one metric. I am going to succeed.
And how did you measure success?
Yeah, what was your definition?
Because that's important too, right? There's a lot of ways to...
Sure. Yeah, great. So starting off as a child, success is good grades.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So straight A student all the way through university, never made a B.
Wow.
Valedictorian of high school and college. And according to the dean at UT School of Architecture, the first person ever to graduate with a 4.0 from the School of Architecture.
Wow.
And I don't say that because I'm proud of it. I say it because you can see what motivated me.
Right.
And, I was an All-American gymnast. I was National Student Leader of the Year. I had all the accolades, but I will tell you, I got to the end of that and none of it was satisfying. And 2 years into practicing architecture, I was ready to drop out.
Wow.
I was like, this is all I've ever wanted to do.
That's an important message.
And it's killing me.
Yeah.
Because
Literally,
you were
it's killing me.
overworking yourself?
I don't know that I was overworking. Yeah, I worked long hours.
Sure.
Everybody did.
Did you run? Because what was interesting I heard from that story is, right, all along the way, and you see this in the modern system too, right? You have someone that's there to metric success for you. But as soon as you leave that education system and you're out into the world writ large, there isn't such a tangible feedback mechanism to be like, you got an A, you got a B, you got whatever. And it can be quite easy to suddenly be like, oh, I have to decide for myself. Some people just decide it's money, the biggest number wins.
Right.
But then you're not going to be getting A's anymore straight out the door, if you will.
Well, you wouldn't be an architect either.
Well,
I had figured that out a long time before. No, I didn't measure success by money and never have and still don't.
And I'm not advocating anyone should, just for the
but there is a measuring system in architecture. One of them is design awards.
Okay, yeah, true.
Okay.
Right. So I'm winning design awards as a kid. And I'm being recognized for my work in Washington, D.C., major market. And none of that satisfies.
Okay.
Because I think there was a deeper hole in my heart that was looking to be filled. I wanted to actually matter.
And give back in some way.
And not feel like my worth was based on my performance, which I think we all
It's very easy
can get trapped
to fall into that, yeah.
And it doesn't satisfy. There has to be something that motivates you beyond.
But it's not intrinsic. I mean, external motivators are nice. They're always handy to some extent, and awards and things. But at the end of the day, it's you alone in your bed at night trying to go to sleep that has to decide whether or not you're happy or not. And no amount of external encouragement or discouragement is going to change whether or not you are actually happy.
Yeah, and I would say I would go to bed at night. Classic. I would lie in bed for however long it took, and I would recount my entire day and say, how did I do? I measured my performance every single day.
Yeah.
And that drove me to success, but also drove me to really begin to not despise, but question what I was doing with my life.
Right.
And
the meaning of
the real meaning of life. And so I ended up actually quitting my job and going to work as a caretaker on the grounds of a retreat center, mowing grass and raking leaves.
Which is the architect equivalent of quitting out of software and taking up woodworking or
something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, something where, my entire worth was in, how straight was that, grass that I mowed, or did I leave any leaves on the lawn?
Did people think you were crazy?
Absolutely. I mean,
Great question. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I look back on it, and one of my closest friends in architecture actually sat down with me and laid out how I was throwing my entire life away, and he was like, "You are, the most successful young architect I know in the city, and this is where you're headed." And he's still a very close friend, and he met really well. And in some ways, excuse me, from the world's perspective, he was right. I look back, and my parents were actually surprisingly quiet about it.
Wow.
They didn't push me, and I think that I recognized in some ways that I was on a life-saving mission. I was trying to save my own life.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. I mean, my roommate during part of this time was a guy that we brought in off the street, a homeless guy, manic, depressive, schizophrenic, psychotic, male prostitute, selling his body on the street to support his habit. And I invited him to become my roommate, and we worked side by side. And
also literally insane. But what a big heart.
It was in some ways insane. His father was a very, very important person in politics who I happened to meet, and in that conversation, he had an unusual last name. I asked him if he was related to this guy, and he said, "Yes. How do you know him?" And I said, "Well, I met him, one evening in the community, and he asked me if his son could move in with us because he didn't have any place else to go." And so, this homeless man shows up in a stretch limo to this home that I lived in with a group of men.
There's some juxtaposition.
Yeah. And we worked side by side, and I learned so much from him. His name is Tom. And I think as a result, that began to shape my sense of
values.
What I really want to do with my life.
Yeah.
I mean, is Tom as important as, the wealthy developer that I was working with? And the answer was, yeah, absolutely.
I think it's such an important message because, the audience is, Gen Z is trying to figure out, has a lot of these same questions. And you hear this story, not quite like this, but similar, where you have these athletes that go pursue like a gold medal, right? And they work their butt off for 4 years to get there, and they get there and they get the gold medal, and the next day they're depressed. It's it's like, all right, I got there now.
Buzz Aldrin effect.
Yeah,
he came back and became a massive alcoholic.
Yeah, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And it's because of what you're saying. It's like this deeper meaning of life. Is it not the thing that I'm doing? It's who I am, and who is it? Who I am, and that's the
apart from what I'm doing. That I am not what I do. I'm a human being,
right?
And I need to figure out who that person is.
What are my values? What do I care about?
One thing I do think is really interesting, though, is that you bring this up, that if you are going to rediscover a love for architecture, what a wonderful way to do it than by helping someone find a home. Like,
it's interesting you bring that up, because later on I ended up designed the largest center for the unhoused in the world in San Antonio, Haven for Hope. Also did the center in Dallas, and I was presenting at Austin City Council. And afterward, a gentleman in the audience, really literally began to verbally attack me. Who are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to sell us? What do you know about being homeless? What do you know about mental health? And it was like the light bulb went off for me. It's like, the reason I'm doing this is because of Tom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the first time I realized it when I was challenged.
Wow.
That there was something so deeply embedded in me. And Tom died homeless on the side of the road in California, and his parents called me, and they had identified his body through a book that I'd given him. It was the only thing on his possession.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And so,
I did just have to say, the fact that you didn't feel the need to save him through the rest of his life is also very powerful, and that you were open to living with someone who is always typically ostracized in the community, and you opened up your home. It's just so beautiful.
Well, I did it with a community of other young men that I was living with. So I wasn't alone, and we were all supported one another in it. And, so often I think the thing is that it's like things come at us that we don't expect, and they change the trajectory of our life.
Right.
And, for me in that time, that year, one day we were out weeding on the side of the hill, and what we didn't know was that we were weeding poison ivy roots.
Gosh.
Oh, wonderful.
And so I pulled these roots out with my hand, and as a child, I was extremely allergic to poison ivy, like almost hospitalized. And I ended up getting an incredibly severe case, went to the doctor and said, look, this is going to get really bad. Put me on the strongest thing you've got. And that was on Wednesday. On Sunday, I called him and I said, I'm a little concerned. My hands are swollen to twice their normal size. They're blue. They're ice cold. I can't move them and I have no feeling. And he said, go to the emergency room immediately. And a couple of the guys who I was living with took me down to George Washington Hospital. And the resident looked me over and said, oh, you have poison ivy. And then I showed him my hands. He was like, hold it. And he brought the attending physician in, and she gathered the entire emergency room staff around me and began to explain my condition. And I said, do you mind sharing with me what you're saying? Because I had no idea what you just said. It was mostly Latin.
Show and tell.
Yeah, exactly.
And she said, yeah, we've read about cases like this, but we've never seen one. The poison ivy has grown inward and it's choking your hands, which is why they're in their condition they're in.
Wow.
And
I didn't know about
You had poison ivy growing inside your hand?
yeah, and it was all in my bloodstream. There was not a square inch of my body that wasn't covered with blisters. And she said, and I said, so she said, I'm afraid you're never going to use your hands again.
Oh my gosh.
And I started laughing. I was like, I'm an architect. And without these hands, I can never do architecture.
Right.
And she said, well, why is that funny? And I said, I love architecture, but I love God more. And if I'm not going to be an architect, I can't wait to see what I'm going to do because it's going to be incredible.
Yeah.
And I had this confidence. And in many ways, that was the moment when I said, I can live without architecture. I no longer have to do this
Wow.
to be of value. And 3 days later, my hands started moving, and I got I got my hands back, and there was a sense for me of like, okay, I am supposed to be an architect, but I'm supposed to do it differently. And I think that really did change the trajectory of my life. I went back to practicing and have practiced pretty much nonstop since then. And it's been a really rewarding thing.
What a powerful story.
Well, that's just the beginning.
Yeah, I'm beginning to gather that.
So what age are you now? Your hands have just come back. How old?
25, 26. Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate that story, Rick, and well, that part of your life, because again, I always think about audience. I always think about, I've got a 21-year-old. You've got kids.
Yeah.
How old are they?
My oldest is 41 and my youngest is 31.
Okay. Mine is 21. So in this, you've got five?
Five.
Okay. So I've got one. And
Hey,
so and all this growing is because
requires all
exactly.
of you. 5 requires all of you. It doesn't really matter.
But my mind immediately goes to her and all her friends and what she grew up with. And part of our passion for doing everything that we're doing is because every generation has this different set of challenges that they deal with. And for me, what I've seen in the background and all the things that got us here, not just her, but I helped wealth management practice, and I helped tons of families like save for their kids' college. And I just kind of saw all this, and I saw that there was a lot of misdirection or no direction because both parents were working and doing their thing. It's like, go figure it out in college. Here's your money, go figure it out. And so I just saw that disconnect. And so that's why my mind goes to the audience all the time in the story and in the stories that we tell. And what I really appreciate about this is what your story has done so far is kind of help think outcome, right? Because so many people are thinking about that very next step, right? And you were doing this next step and you were excelling, you were getting 4.0, you were doing what others had not done, but that's not where happiness was. And you got to a point where you really started seeing it took you some life experience to get there, but you had that one moment where you're like, okay, all the things that I've built, I can walk away from. And
one of the things that one of my mentors, who's actually the dad of one of my partners, Madison Smith, he once told us there always must be a death of a vision before it returns. And I think I could look at probably every chapter of my life and there is a death to the vision. You have to go through that place of saying, this may not happen.
Got it.
Or this will not happen. Or I may not ever use my hands again. Or this business thing that I've started has failed and I'm never going to come back. I mean, those are the thoughts that you're, processing. But I think that death of the vision is actually a really important part of, teaching you, stealing you, giving you the grit and the determination to actually succeed.
So that it can resurrect itself
yes.
turn.
And it always comes back better.
Right. Better than you could have ever imagined.
And I've never heard that before, but you hear often necessity is the mother of invention. Right. And there was a story that we'll get on this podcast. It was actually on one of other podcasts you were on Navigating Complexity, where this founder had gotten to this point where done, like the business that she had created was completely done. She was like, went home and cried with some wine, and her husband turned the bathtub on and was like, okay, we're done, because she'd gotten all this experience and all this possible success, but the co-founder couldn't get it done. And so she was like, I'm done. And then that was the point when it did that.
It took off.
Exactly. So everything you're saying just immediately reminded me of that story. And there's so many stories that way. I want to get to the part of your story that we discussed around where you get your first big project.
Sure.
Because I thought that was such a, again, we don't ever know what to expect. So the universe just kind of lines things up. God, universe, whatever that is, it just lines things up. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't know how that happened.
Well, probably to tee up that, when I was in school, developed some really close friendships in architecture and ended up founding Overland with those friends. Did the thing that everyone says you shouldn't do, which is sort of practice with our best friends. And we're still practicing together. We still love each other. It's still a very deep friendship. But we also, none of us was independently wealthy. None of us came into this, with a whole lot of work. We all quit our jobs. We moved to San Antonio, Texas, which is where we decided to practice. And we did literally whatever we could do. At one point, this was 1987, long before you guys can remember, major crash in the economy. We're in a deep recession.
Black Monday, is that what that was?
Yeah, I think we were like one of the only businesses started in San Antonio that year. And we were interviewed by the San Antonio Business Journal, and they asked us what style of architecture we did. And my partner, Robert, immediately quipped survivalist. I mean, literally, if you need it, we do it. I mean, we were.
Is it paying? I'll do it.
Yeah, we were really
maybe
proud.
Pay later? Yeah, maybe.
We were doing the ADA improvements to a diner, and we were so proud of the fact that we had work. At one point, we literally took the yellow pages and tore it into parts, and we just called people.
Right.
I mean, it was just. You do whatever you have to do.
By all means necessary.
Yes, whatever you need, we will do it.
Tree houses.
And that's really the world we were living in.
Yeah, sure.
We were, when I was flying back from Washington, D.C. to San Antonio and ended up sitting next to one of my classmates from school who had gone on to work for one of the premier developers in the world, Gerald Hines. And we were just visiting, and he called me the next day and he said, "Hey, I'm in Salt Lake City and I've got this building that I don't know what to do with. And it sounds like what you were doing in Washington, D.C." And I described the building. I said, well, it's got a terracotta skin. It's got structural clay tile. It's got this mechanical system. He's like, "Do you know this building?" I said, "No, but that's what I was doing in Washington, D.C." And he said, how quickly can you get to Salt Lake City? And I said, "I got nothing else going on. I'll be there tomorrow." So flew out and we landed this job. We had a fairly modest fee, but we did all these drawings, of course, pre-computer.
Mm-hmm.
All of them were done by hand, beautiful hand drawings. And I'm flying out to Salt Lake City to present them to the managing partner. And my partner, Madison, picks me up the next morning and he says, like, really what happened? The drawings were in my car overnight and someone broke my windshield and stole them. So you're flying to Salt Lake City, present to the partners with nothing. And, and I'm a 31-year-old young architect, got my own practice. Yeah, that's really sexy. And
just go to that really conceptual line art style. Like, hey, here are some concept drawings.
Well, words became really valuable. So, I get out there and describe what's happening. And he's like, "Well, it's a damn good thing that somebody knows how to do this kind of building because we sure don't." And so that developed a really great relationship with Hines and got back. And my partners, Tim and Madison, Robert, were all sitting around going, "Well, now we have nothing else to do except we have to redraw all these drawings." And Robert called the insurance company and they paid us our entire fee to redraw the drawings.
Oh,
so it was like we had nothing else to do, and now we had 3 more months of work. Courtesy of someone who stole the drawings,
Nice.
which was pretty awesome. So not very auspicious beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow we ended up on a very long list of probably close to 100 architects in the country who are being considered to design the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, which is here in Austin.
I was there this weekend.
Were you really?
Yes, for Fortopia, which is also, there was giant Lincoln logs, like life-size Lincoln logs. It was so fun and so beautiful. And I'll let you tell the story.
It's a great place. Well, we were invited to submit our credentials, which was not much since we hadn't really completed anything. And I got a call from Dee Dee Rose, who was the building committee chair. And she says to us, "Well, you guys have made the first cut we want to come and visit one of your completed projects. And
you're like, where's the ADA?
Where's that diner?
We had completed an apartment complex for scientists in the Texas Hill Country, and I think the construction budget was $32 a square foot.
Oh, wow.
Just to kind of put this in context.
For our audience, can you explain so for our kids at home, can you explain what that means?
That means really cheap. That means like
on a budget.
Yeah. Like almost impossible. Yeah. So we take all of us, all the partners, went out there. We're like, this is so super cool because we're going to meet the First Lady. There's going to be Secret Service. They're going to be all these cool people that like Academy Award winning actress Helen Hayes and the former mayor of Austin and the chief of staff of the White House and all these important people. And we get out there, and we're just very humbly showing this little project. And later on, we found out that Lady Bird was legally blind, so she couldn't actually see what we were showing her.
Wow.
She was a very frugal German, and $32 a square foot sounded great to her. And then at the end, we had saved this enormous oak tree that we had built the complex around. And she walked up to the tree and she said, "You saved the bees." And we're like, huh?
Sure, yeah.
But she heard bees in this tree. She said, "You saved the bees." And we're like, yeah, we saved the bees.
You said it.
And so the combination of those three things, bees, budget, and the fact, and blind.
She couldn't see it.
The three Bs. We got invited to the interview, and they were interviewing, I believe, 5 firms. Every one of them were people that we had studied in our textbooks. They were the biggest names in architecture in the country. And my partners and I were like, what are we going to show them? I mean, an interview normally is, here's who we are, here's what we've done, and here's how we'll approach your project. Well, they'd seen the only project we'd ever completed at that point. So we said, well, let's focus on how we'll approach the project. And so we were going to show them images of indigenous Texas buildings in fields of wildflowers. And
that fits, that tracks.
Yeah.
What the Wildflower Center's done. Yeah.
And so the problem is this is pre-internet. So where do you find these photos? Libraries.
Dewey Decimal System, everybody.
We go to the library, we go to the county library, go to the university libraries. We can't find a thing. We're out at the Wildflower Center the week before our interview and doing a tour of their existing facilities, which were in East Austin in a double-wide trailer. We walked into their library, and in the corner, there's an old slide file system. And we walked over and we start pulling out the slides, and they're the most extraordinary photos you've ever seen. So one of us turned to the librarian and said, "Hey, can we borrow these from you?" And she said, "Sure, no one's ever looked at them. Take all of them and bring them back when you're done. No questions asked." So we go to the interview. We show them images from their slide library. And at one point, one of the members of the building committee said, "Those are the most beautiful photos of what we're looking for that we've ever seen. Where in the world did you find them?" And I think we all just blushed, and basically said, "In your library." And Lady Bird leaned over to Lowell Leberman, who was sitting to her right, former mayor of Austin. She said, "They're very resourceful." And Dee Dee Rose called me up, I think a week later. And at the time she was working with Herzog and Nemeron and Antoine Predock and Sam Mockbee and all these famous architects. And she was like, "Just calling to let you know that we've selected you." And I literally started laughing. I was like, "You're kidding." She goes, "No, and I was like, I would have never selected us. Why?
Are you insane?
Why in the world would you do that? And she said, we just thought you'd be fun to work with. And I think that, God, the life lesson was so profound because I think we went in loose because we knew there was no way we were going to get selected.
Yeah.
I mean, literally. And we that morning, I went to breakfast with my partners wearing the most garish tie with flowers on it. Not, almost looked like a clown tie. And finally, one of them had the guts to say, "You're not wearing that tie to the interview, are you?" And I was like, "Well, of course I am. It's flowers." And
it's on brand.
So I was like, no, it's just a joke. So we decided to package it up and give it to the executive director at the interview. And he opened it up and everyone's howling, laughing. And Lowell Eberman says, well, I want to personally thank you all because it's the first thing that I've actually seen in many years. He was legally blind. I mean, he was fully blind. And so I think, we went into it thinking this is going to be fun.
Right.
And we had fun.
Opportunity to sort of showcase yourself, but you're not seriously expecting the contract to come.
Yeah, and it was in the LBJ library in the private area. And I was like, this is cool. We'll have a story from this.
Yeah.
But we certainly didn't expect we'd be selected. And I think that was such an important lesson that people hire people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't looking for a transaction. What they wanted to know is that we were going to be passionate about what they're doing and that we would come alongside and really,
resourceful.
And hungry.
And $32 a square foot.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we didn't pull that off, but they did have a very strict budget, $7.2 million. And if you were out there, think about that place being built for $7.2 million, including all the landscaping.
And the buildings on the land. It's so stunning. It is so stunning. I think I want to get married there.
Well, you better sign up well in advance because it's a couple of year waiting list.
Yeah.
We had one bride tell us that she had gotten married there and just how memorable it had been. And then her mom said, yeah, and we had booked it 2 years in advance. And then she broke off her engagement. But we didn't give up the date. She just found another guy.
Stop.
It took so long.
Finally found another guy married in 2 years.
You have to book it so far in advance. It's possible.
It may not be so bad now, but yeah, it is a really special place. And when we met with Lady Bird for the first time, we're like, this is your vision. We're here to serve you. What do you want it to be? And I'll never forget. I mean, she looked at us in all sincerity. She said, I just want it to look like God put it there. And we're like, oh crap, we are in big trouble.
Now we're really
just a simple task.
Raise the bar a little bit.
But I think that really emboldened us, that we weren't going to be timid. And we talked about it was a fragile landscape. Do we float this thing over the land on stilts? And it's like, no, God wouldn't do that. Like he would be bold. And I think it would predated the environmental movement. Lady Bird was the mother of the environmental movement.
Wow.
And so we created our own measuring system for sustainability, which became the precursor for LEED and then sustainable sites.
Was it measured in bees?
We actually measured everything as best we could. It was before people thought about carbon. It was we thought about how we'd measure energy consumption and about human comfort, and we created an entire metric system that we judged what we were doing against, and it really set the standard for the way people thought about building. And again, I think innovation often comes out of we don't know any better.
Right.
Right. It's like there's nothing out there, so I guess I'll just make something.
Yeah.
And then because there's nothing out there, somebody says, well, that's something, we'll use that.
Yeah. And I think also we're trying to prove ourselves. We got to prove to people we actually know what we're doing because we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, we were not environmentalists when we started that project. But now we're known as some of the most environmental architects in the world because we embraced the challenge and we learned from Lady Bird, who was just one of the best teachers anyone could possibly have.
What a gift.
Yeah, she's amazing, really amazing. I was able to be with her shortly before her death, she had a stroke later in life and she lost her voice. And Lady Bird was one of the most eloquent people I've ever met. I mean, she could talk to kings and princes or paupers, and everybody loved her. And she rolled up in her wheelchair with Shirley, who had been her long-term time assistant, and she kind of bowed to me like this, and Shirley said, "Lady Bird wants you and your partners to know that since she's lost her voice, the Wildflower Center you created for her has become her voice."
Oh, wow.
And I think that there was this.
I'm crying for those of you who can't watch this.
Yeah, that is quite a lot. Yeah.
But I think in a lot of ways, it's what we do as architects.
Yeah.
What we do as creatives is we give voice to those who don't have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're homeless. Sometimes they've lost their voice. Sometimes they're just unseen. But a building is one of the greatest outward expressions of what we value most.
You okay?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in our homes, in the things that we choose to build. If you hire an architect to build something, you're trying to express what you value. And sometimes it will be that building which will speak for the person or the organization more than anything else they ever do.
It's an interpretation, right? So people come with you with ideas, and you've got to interpret that. And then I know that we were discussing this in the other podcast where you and Matt were talking about how you just have to have that connection with individuals. So it's as much as designing, creating, and visualizing, and as it is interpreting someone else, what they're saying, what they're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what we do as architects is we make tangible something which begins invisible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it begins in the world of ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get to translate that into a physical form that gets planted on the earth. And if we do it well, you know, it has a positive impact on people for generations to come. Hopefully outlives us.
I love that. Love that. There was one story, and I well, maybe we have to back into it a little bit, but you were working for a firm and you took on a design that nobody else wanted, or they were too busy. Do you remember that? Or maybe I thought it was your first job, where it's like, I'll do this at night. And
oh yeah, that was in my very, very first job. So that actually was the retreat center that I ended up working at.
Okay.
Our firm was incredibly busy, and this little project came in. It was to renovate a carriage house into a retreat center for world leaders. And I knew the project was out there and no one was working on it. And so finally I went to my boss one day and I said, "Hey, I want to work on that project." Mind you, I'm, like a 23-year-old kid out of school. And he's like, "You're too busy. You got too much to do. Besides, you don't know what you're doing." And I said, "Well, that's true." I said, "But you don't have anybody better because everyone is so busy." And he said, "Well, I can't take you off the work you're on." And I said, "I'll do it at night. I'll do it at night and the weekends. You don't have to pay me for it. But if it gets approved when we go for our first design meeting, then it'll come into the office. I'll be the lead architect and you'll give me a team." And he kind of looked at me like, "Who the heck do you think you are?" And he said, he finally said, "I really don't have a better deal. I don't know how else we're going to do this." And so, he assigned me the project, and sure enough, I was able to get it done. We had one point where we were behind. We had committed something to the client. This was actually after it had come into the office, and he had not assigned me to the project. And I went into him and I said, "We have a problem here because we've made a commitment to this client that we're going to deliver this thing on this time, and we're not going to get it done." And he said, "You're so naive. You always make commitments in business that you can't keep." And I said, "Well, I don't. Like, you might, but I don't." And he was like, "What do you want me to do about that?" And I said, "I want you to call the client, tell them that we're not going to meet the commitment, and let's set a new date, and, give me some hours." And so he's looking at me and he goes, "Okay, I'll give him a call." And I just stood there in his office. And he was like, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm waiting for you to call."
Impeccable to your word.
And he's like, Okay. So he calls, and the client was gracious and said, yeah, understand, things happen. Thanks for letting me know. And, but one of the other things that happened in that same job was that, and I think these are relevant for a young person starting. We had one client that we were doing 7 buildings for, which is a lot. It was about a 40-person firm, so that was occupying more than half of the staff, and I was on one of those. And the client came in for a meeting. I'd built a giant model of this building, and my boss was explaining it to the client, and the client said, I just don't like it. And my boss doubled down on the idea and, kept, pushing it. Finally, the client looked at me and he said, Rick, what do you think? I was like, this is not good. And finally I said, I agree with you.
Oh.
And I really thought I was going to lose my job on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, my boss got so angry, he slammed his fist on the table, yelling, I'm the architect. Put his fist through the table, split his fist open, pulled out his pocket square, wrapped his hand in the handkerchief, and
went back to banging on the table.
He's shaking his bloody fist at the client. I'm the architect. I'm the architect. And I'm watching this going, I don't think I'd handle it this way.
Right.
And the next day we got fired from all 7 projects, and half the staff was laid off.
Wow.
I fully expected I was going to be one of, I wasn't. To this day, I don't know why, because, I certainly didn't say what my boss wanted. But I think one of the clear lessons for me, and I tell the young people this all the time, you're being hired to speak up. You are being paid to bring yourself fully to whatever it is you're doing. And if you hold back and you're not honest about what you think, that doesn't mean it's going to be accepted, you're going to be right. But it is incredibly important that you share your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And you share them honestly, candidly. And so I did. My job was preserved, but it was so many of the things that have shaped my way of thinking are when you observe things that are not the way they ought to be.
Right.
You say, I'm not going to be that person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and you're not the only one that says that. I mean, I think Steve Jobs said, it's like we always, you hire people smarter than you because you want to listen to them. It's not like you're telling them what to do. If you're doing that, then that's,
And that's what a good mentor does, right? Is you engage people and then you give them a platform to think, create, express their ideas, make it safe for them, let them fail well, learn quickly. And that's a lot of fun.
And that's a good segue, because I was going to ask you that next. How's mentorship impacted your life, both as being a mentor and a mentee?
Well, I have been really blessed by some amazing mentors. And several of them come to mind. One was Lady Bird. Mm-hmm. I worked with her for 15 years, and there's no doubt she was a mentor. She taught me how to look at the world through her lens, to live in harmony with nature, to do it in a way that was graceful and gracious. And at the time, she was the most powerful and most respected woman in the world. And yet, this was a woman of profound humility. So I would count her as one. Mm-hmm. Right after I graduated, I lived in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., in a rent-controlled apartment across the street from this very large home that was the Librarian of Congress who lived there. And I became friends with his kids, who were at the time at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Davidson. Really dumb family.
Yeah.
And
low achievers.
In time, they started inviting me to their home on Sunday evenings for dinner. And I would sit there at the dinner table, and I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Literally. Because the alliteration, the references to literature, words that I'd never heard of. I mean, all I'd ever wanted to be was an architect. And this is before, I'd taken the time off. And I would literally write words on my hand, and then I'd go home and look them up in the dictionary. And then one day I came in to Dr. Billington and I said, Dr. Billington, I graduated with a 4.0 in architecture, but I realize I'm really ignorant. And I don't want to be anymore. Will you help me? And he put his arm around me. He took me into his library and he said, I'm going to curate your reading. He pulled Shakespeare off the shelf and he said, read this. We'll talk about it next week. And every week when I came back, he would give me a different book. Shakespeare, Dante, Neruda, Graham Greene, Somerset Maugham, T.S. Eliot, Steinbeck. And that changed my life, literally. To the point where when people say, what are your greatest influences on your work? My answer would be literature. Wow. Not other architecture, not other art, literature.
Brunelleschi's Dome. I'm sure you've read that. Yeah. It's an architect's dream come true. Yeah. And it's a dome in Florence, Italy.
Yeah. And so what I began to realize is that there was so much I didn't know and didn't understand because I didn't know how to read critically. And I didn't know how to write. And I really committed myself to learning those two disciplines, which have served me incredibly well as an architect. And I credit Dr. Billington with that. And then the third one is a guy by the name of Baker Duncan. And Baker was a man that I encountered shortly after moving to San Antonio from Washington, D.C. in my early 30s. And I kept hearing about this guy who mentored a lot of young people in the city. And I ran into him one day and was interested in getting to know him. And so I said, hey, I've heard a lot about you. Would love to get to know you. He said, well, come to my office on this date at this time. And I showed up and sitting there, this guy's like 6'4", bald as a cue ball, wore black horn rimmed glasses on the end of his nose, kind of Ichabod Crane. He had been head of school for private prep school in the East. And he said, so why are you here? And I said, well, I just want to get to know you. I've heard that you mentor a lot of people and I'd like to be your friend. He said, well, you have to choose. Which one do you want? I was like, what do you mean? He said, I can help you. I can be your friend, but I can't be both.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I want you to be both. He said, I don't do that. Think about it and let me know what you want. And I was like, what just happened? I mean, literally I walked out and he was like, that's it. Goodbye. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I was talking to my sister, Lisa, about this encounter. And she said, I think you ought to ask him to help you. She said, you're always helping other people. Why don't you get some help? I was like, ooh, I don't know if I know how to do that because that requires humility. That means I have to admit that I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
That I maybe am not succeeding in the way that I thought I was. And so I went back to Baker and I said, okay, I want your help. And so we began to meet about once a month, always over lunch in his very proper dining room at the board table that he had served. And he would just grill me. And I think what it did is it forced me to look very honestly at my life.
Right.
And not at my resume, not at the BS that I'd, been able to succeed on, and to own some of the things that I had done that actually weren't so great.
Right.
And to be okay with them.
That mirror. Here's a mirror.
Yep. That's really what Baker did. And one of the hard things for me is that, almost all of my mentors died within 2 months of each other.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking, and it was the same time when my mom died, who was also one of my mentors, and thinking, now what do I do?
Right.
Now where do I go? Who do I take my chits to? Mm-hmm. Where do I cash them in? Because those people who had invested so much in me they're vitally important in my life.
Right.
Right. So you probably felt like you were without
a little adrift.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to see Baker literally on his deathbed, and we had a great conversation, and he was like, "You're good now. Get out of here. Don't come see me again." Literally, he's like,
you passed the test.
You're done.
Wow.
That's so powerful.
At some point, did you feel that shift? And I was like, okay, it's now my turn to start helping others, or?
I've always kind of had that, probably way before I should have.
Right.
Was always trying to help people, probably when I didn't have a whole lot to give. I think largely because people had always invested in me,
right.
At an early age. And I've always been motivated by, giving back to the extent that I had something to give. Sometimes to a fault, where you think,
sometimes you care more.
Just relax a little bit.
Yeah. I've done that where you care more about the project than they do. Like, I need to not do that. But no, that makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Let's do one question. I think that I was so enthralled with all the things you had to say, but I'd like to get one question from our audience or our Gen Z.
I'm really intrigued by this.
Yeah. Okay.
They ask some good questions.
Yeah.
I bet they do.
They're sort of a bit more
okay
purpose. They're thinking already. What's that purpose going to be? How am I going to help? What difference am I going to make? How will the world be better for my?
So this is Miles. He's an ACC student, and he has a question around navigating the world of chaos.
I'm studying economics at the moment, with my extracurricular emphasis is on policy and civic engagement. As far as mentors I can think of, I'm kind of going outside the realm of people currently alive.
Great.
One figure that really fascinates me and that I would love to ask a question, if I could, is Monsieur Talleyrand. He was the French foreign minister during the early 1800s, and he has several accomplishments to boast, but he's basically the person that saved France from foreign occupation after Napoleon was defeated, and he's sort of seen as this duplicitous, but also very masterful and genuinely patriotic diplomat. I would ask him, how do you navigate a world dominated by chaos and fervor and cynicism? How do you, win people over? How do you, when all the dust is settled, how do you build back up? Because those are the things we need to start thinking about as the world starts heading into more uncertain directions, just as a matter of damage control, I think.
I love that.
What an amazing question.
Wow. Existential.
When I was because I was in the background and you were asking the question, I was like imagining who we would ask. And I think you're the perfect person to ask this question.
I did not say France from, after Napoleon.
I couldn't get you Napoleon, ladies and gentlemen.
But we got Mr. Archer here.
Yeah, no, I think this was who messed you up was Katie. I think that was a great matchup.
That's a great choice.
But no, he's just such a deep thinker. But at the end of the day, what he's thinking about is this chaos. How do we, he's seen a figure in time that had something similar to what we're going through now. It's like, how do we fix this mess?
Yeah. I would say to Miles, the time that I was your age, I hate it when people say that, but sorry.
It's true.
We're there.
We were just coming out of the Vietnam War. The United States was in utter chaos. I mean, it was upheaval everywhere. There were protests everywhere, massive drug culture. And the drug culture was a response to, I feel out of control. I'm trying to figure out a way to just navigate through the utter chaos of the world around me.
Right.
And, I missed the draft by a year or two. My older brother was drafted. Fortunately, he did not, his draft number was low or high enough. He didn't get called in, but there was a tremendous amount of fear that surrounded that period of time. And then, you come out of Johnson and, all of the upheaval and some really good things that came out of that upheaval, all the civil rights legislation and the things that we're living in today, the 1,000 Laws of the Great Society. We all live in Johnson's America today. So typically out of this kind of upheaval, there are significant sea changes that happen that can be very positive. But we came right out of that into Nixon and Watergate. And I mean, it was crazy. And then we've got Carter and the embargoes and Iran hostage crisis. And I mean, it kind of makes today look a little bit mellow.
Yeah.
And yet I think the way that my generation navigated through it after we decided we could be productive and that we didn't have to just escape was that we began to say, how do we begin in our own life, in our own way, to tackle some of the things that are right in front of us? Like you can't change all that stuff out there, but you can start right here.
Right.
You can start inside yourself and say, okay, how am I contributing to a greater sense of peace and order and well-being, flourishing for all humans? And what part can I play? I mean, I think that's always been the tactic that I've taken. And quite honestly, kind of in the midst of all that, I'd step off the planet, for almost 2 years. I stopped practicing architecture. I spend time trying to figure out, who am I in the midst of all of this? And I'm not saying, Miles, that you need to step off the planet or drop out of school or any of those things, but I will say it starts there. And then I'd say the second thing is, you don't do it alone. Right. You do it in community with other people. Find one or two or three or just a handful of people that you can walk with through this, because it's amazing how much stability you can feel in the midst of chaos if you just have a friend, somebody who really knows you and understands you. And I was blessed to have some really, really good friends around me with my partners, and then also with other friends that I had made in Washington, D.C. And I think we navigated the complexity of those times, the chaos of those times, by leaning a lot on one another and focusing on things that mattered.
I love that.
I do too.
That was you taking it and comparing it to Vietnam makes a whole lot of sense, because if you're just looking at today and you don't have another, he compared it to France, right? But if you don't have anything else to compare it by, it can be daunting.
And it is chaotic today. Yeah. I mean, I would say that we are seeing some political upheaval that is historic. Right. Actually, political polarization. I'd say that's what's historic.
Divisiveness, yeah.
Not the upheaval. We've always had the upheaval, but the divisiveness about whether or not we actually all are working toward the same thing from different perspectives, which I do think, the radical leftists and McCarthy all thought they were, trying to achieve the same thing, which is I believe in a better America that would actually contribute to the world. I think today we have some concern about those things, and that does feel very unstable. I don't think it changes the advice, which is that you're not going to change all that. That doesn't mean you don't invest, you don't vote, you don't get involved. I think you should, and I think that's vitally important. But it's also the long game. When we moved to San Antonio 37 years ago, it was the second poorest city in the country. Memphis was the poorest. I looked at San Antonio and I saw opportunity. I didn't see a poor city. I saw vacant buildings and things that like, wow, there's something for me to do here. I can really invest in this place. 37 years later, I can look back and say, we've had a real impact on that city.
Right.
By just doing one thing after the next, putting one foot in front of the other.
And it is the way that you see the world. And I think that's such an important message, because you can always see it glass half empty, glass half full, and what one person can do, right? Because you're told this since you're a kid. It's like, every person can be president. Yeah, every person has this impact, and it's whether you believe that or not. But it's like, be the change you want to see. We talk about that. What is not being done, and what can I do about it?
What can I do? Not what should somebody else be doing?
Exactly.
I mean, I had an activist in my office who would frequently come to me when I was CEO and say, what are we doing about? And that topic could widely range. What are we doing about, Me Too in the Kavanaugh hearings? What are we doing about kids in cages on the border?
Right.
And as the CEO, I was always mindful that actually what I said mattered to her in this. And I remember when she came to me about kids in cages on the border, and she's like, we need to be posting on our social channels. We need to be doing these things. And I said, I get it. I said, I'm not doing that. But last week I had a meeting with the ambassador from Guatemala, with senators and congressmen, to work on this issue by trying to solve it binationally. If I post about any of this,
right,
the work we're doing,
it's invalid.
It won't happen. And so don't think because I'm not doing what you think I should be doing that I'm not doing anything.
Right.
I see the world through a slightly different lens. And I do think today there's often this sense of, well, if I just get on social media and put my views out there, that I've solved the problem.
Right.
Right.
Well, you haven't.
Right.
What you need to ask is, who do I know that cares about this problem that I can partner with so that we might be able to move the needle a little bit?
Yeah.
Now, we didn't solve the border crisis,
right,
but we did solve the problem of Guatemalan kids being in cages on the border. And that's a start, right? So I think you tackle each thing as it comes to you, and you have some ability to do it. That was coincidental that she's asked me about an issue that I was passionate about and was working on. But I think that's one of the things today that we really need to focus on, is actually do something.
Yeah. Take action. I think we have time for one more, just because that was such a great answer. Not that, let's get another one. Also political representation. So maybe it's going to be similar.
How do you manage to represent the people that you get voted to represent through these times where there's a lot of extremism? How do you manage to do that? That would be my question. So
this group of individuals that we were talking to were just at student
government.
They
were all involved in student government at ACC.
So they really were passionate about issues
and policy.
Policy. And so, so I think going back to what his question is like, there's these things, how do you, you just touched on it. I guess we can expand on it a little bit.
Yeah. It's immediately what I thought about was, almost 8 years ago when Donald Trump was first elected, and I came into the office the next morning, and there were people, young architects in my office, who were like, I don't have a place in this country anymore. I mean, literally, they felt so disenfranchised by what had happened. And I felt like my job as a leader was to simply say, whether I agree with what happened or not isn't the issue, but I want to create a safe place for you here. That you may not feel safe when you walk out of here, but we have an environment that you can talk about anything you want. You can have any opinions you want. And by the way, other people are going to as well. And we're going to respect those. Yeah. We're not casting stones at one another. Because if we can't do it in here, how are we going to do it out there?
Right.
And I don't think that answer was satisfactory to her. But I think she did find over time that having a place where you could talk honestly about what you believed, and that it made it feel at least there was some safe place to be in our country.
Well, and I love that viewpoint because that's where it starts. I mean, you used to hear about meeting in the middle and across the aisle and all the different things. We've had several people in politics in the on the podcast, and it is about having empathy on somebody else's viewpoints versus, and I think what we've witnessed is a combination of the social media impact of the likes are driven by hate and divisiveness.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what drives this apart. And so if you're aware of the tools that cause that and why they're doing it, and realize that that's completely different than the person across from you, no matter what they believe in, but just kind of like just chatting about what do you believe and what matters to you, and what you just said, creating these safe spaces just to have conversations.
We had the same thing happen when open carry was passed in Texas, and I had employees coming up to me and saying, "So can I bring my gun now?" And I was like, "No, you can't. Your gun is not going to be welcome in this workplace." And they're like, "Well, it's not going to be safe. We have all these people here and they need me to protect them." And I was like, "Well, I appreciate the sentiment. I want you to be a part of a committee that's going to look at safety and security for Overland to make sure that there are things we can do short of carrying guns."
Right.
And that ended up being very productive. And they came up with a lot of really great ideas. And so you've got in the same office, card carrying members of the NRA and, extremely progressive activists. And it's like, we're all going to be a community together.
Right.
We're going to figure this out with the goal of producing amazing architecture that makes a difference in the world. But I realize as a leader that we also can't ignore those things.
Right.
Like we can't say, don't bring that to the office. They're bringing it to the office.
Right.
When the Kavanaugh hearings were going on, I mean, it was high anxiety. People were, had their earphones in all day. They're watching, the hearings. Nobody's getting any work done. There's a lot of anxiety around what's happening, and I could see people starting to take sides in the office. And we gathered one Monday morning, and I said to him, "Look, when I was a teenager, I was sexually molested by a teacher. I get it. I know what's going on here. But, there's a story in the scripture where this woman is accused of adultery, and Jesus says to the people, 'You who are without sin, throw the first stone.'"
Right.
And it says that they left one at a time, beginning with the oldest. And I said, "We're not throwing stones here.
Right.
I don't care which side of this issue on. We're not throwing stones." And I think that it was fascinating because I think some people were frustrated with me with sharing my own story. I got all these people, lots of people in the office sending me, "Me too, me too, me too," that felt seen, heard, appreciated. And we were able to get back to work, which was really my goal as the CEO, not just as a way to make money, but because that's what we were there for.
Yeah.
And that's where we feel the deepest sense of connection, a sense of purpose, a sense of dignity by doing really, really good work. And I think that was one of the most disruptive things, is that people on both sides weren't getting their work done.
Right.
And nobody liked that.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for sharing all your stories, and
thanks, Natalie.
It was really powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a wild ride.
It was. I cannot believe I was just at the Wildflower Center yesterday.
I'm so glad you were.
Yesterday, and then I get to meet you.
It is such a special place.
It's just so cool.
Where are you going to be tomorrow?
At the Cotton Bowl.
How do I get a private
Cotton Bowl?
Yeah.
We're doing the renovation of the Cotton Bowl right now.
I know. That's why I said that.
Alrighty. Well, that's a wrap for season 3, episode 2.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks for tuning in to Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life. Rick Archer's story reminds us of the power of passion, creativity, and perseverance in the face of life's unpredictability. From designing iconic spaces like the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center to developing one of the largest centers for the unhoused in San Antonio, Rick and his team have created places that inspire connection and foster community. His story reminds us that true success lies not just in what we build, but in the lives we touch and the stories we leave behind. Here's a fun tidbit. After recording this episode, I excitedly shared Rick's story with my dad, only to discover that he and his brothers grew up on the same street, went to the same school, and were friends with the Archer kids in Houston, Texas, back in the 1960s. Talk about a small world. If you'd like to be a guest or a Gen Z contributor on our show, check out the details in our show notes. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your friends. And join us next time as we continue to explore uncharted paths with more incredible guests.